Hi, I'm Alora Weaver, Director of Enterprise Content at Writer.
And I'm Diego Lomanto, the CMO at Writer.
On this episode of Humans of AI, we are talking to Lisa Gately, Principal Analyst at Forrester. I'm excited. Are you excited about talking with Lisa?
I am so excited about talking with Lisa today. She's seen content systems at the largest scale. She's been a practitioner. She's an analyst now. She advises companies on how to drive transformation in their marketing and content departments using AI. And she's covered it all. So she has some really great frameworks and insights that I think they're going to be excited for us to discuss.
Very cool. All right, let's get into our conversation with Lisa, and stay tuned after for Diego and I to get into our takeaways, next steps for marketing leaders, and insights from this conversation.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
One of the reasons I'm so excited is, you spent more than 20 years inside the machine, right? Doing this job, building, specifically building B2B content engines, writing content, leading the teams before you crossed over to become an analyst who studies, whether it works and how to make it work well, right? That's a rare vantage point. So maybe we could start there. What was your career before you joined Forrester, and what did you do before those days?
I started my career in editorial and communication roles after journalism school. And I was really fascinated between this gap I kept seeing between what organizations want to say and what their audiences care about. And that curiosity eventually led to me going to business school. I wanted to be closer to decisions. I knew that there are a lot of things going into products and the customer experience. And so during the years after that, I went into tech companies and I worked in a variety of portfolio marketing, services marketing, content, and customer marketing roles. I experienced a lot of the transformations that businesses have today. And I would say the experience that really shaped me was I was leading a content and customer marketing team for a company going through significant change. And everything from integrating acquisitions, redefining roles, refreshing the brand, updating the website, you name it. What I realized is that content problems are rarely about content. It's really an organization problem or something to do with your operations or decision making. It's just showing up in your content first.
That is so interesting. So like the fractures and the fault lines inside the organization make their way into the content itself, and you have to attend to that. It's like they say you ship your org chart, right? Like it's probably very similar in the content world. Is that fair?
Very similar. Yeah. And that's perspective I bring to the client conversations today.
What made you cross over to the analyst side? What was it? What was that decision point like? What made you make that, led you to make that decision?
It drew me in because I wanted to study more of transformation at scale. Like you get so admired in your day-to-day as a practitioner. You know one company's reality really well. And it's really hard going through it. You feel like, are we really unique? Do other people have this figured out? And so that was some of my curiosity, was I wondered about how do other people navigate some of this? And I started thinking about maybe somebody out there has it figured out. If I just see enough patterns, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So funny enough, I learned, of course, from the outside, you try to imagine there's somebody who solved everything. And I realized hundreds and hundreds of conversations later, everybody has strengths. Everybody has blind spots. We're all dealing with some constraints or trade-offs, but nobody has the answer.
Got it. So when you moved over to the analyst world, what did you see from this new vantage point that maybe you didn't see before?
Yeah, I realized that you can think, as I was saying, you think that somebody has an answer to this. And I do meet a lot of marketers. I primarily work with marketers. They are super smart and doing some interesting things. The world keeps changing around them. So I realized more and more. I saw a bit of this as a practitioner, but it became true as I met more people I admired. You could make some fantastic efforts. And within a few months, there may be something, whether it's new leadership, entering a new market, you name it. There's an acquisition. There are plenty of things that really make you feel like you took 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You are going to keep doing and learning, and you'll keep redoing and relearning all of the time.
Is there an example of, a problem you experienced in content that maybe you would have handled it one way when you were a practitioner, but you see it in a new way as an analyst, that maybe you didn't have that perspective before?
Oh, very much so. I mean, when I was a practitioner, I was very proud of several projects, whether it was, refreshing an organization's website, or we designed a new customer newsletter and we thought, oh, this is really well done. And I realize you can be so proud of it. You go through a big cycle of new messaging work and realize how much some of this was about what our organization wanted to say. It was about our own priorities. And so some of that adage about, putting the time into understanding your audience, I now see this much more clearly.
Yeah, it's like we're fish, we don't see the water, right? We're like that. That's really hard when you're on the practitioner side to get that 50,000 foot view of what's happening in the market. So I guess that's something that you now can help companies with, being on this other side, getting that perspective. Do you want to talk about what you cover at Forrester? Like, what is your remit, your domain? Like, tell folks what you focus on.
Yeah, I officially cover content strategy and operations, which in recent years has really moved into more research projects about generative AI, AI adoption. How is that changing the work in content and creative teams? Specifically, you can't help but mention how much you are affected by what AI is doing to your buyers. How is that changing some of the buyer behavior? And as a result, are you then going to change many of your efforts working across marketing? Content is a very cross functional activity. So, more change coming there.
I can't imagine an area of the analyst domain that is being more like that has more swirl than being a content marketing analyst with under the domain of AI. Like, what has the last 4 years been like?
Yeah, it is really it brings up all of these big changes that we see in our society. It again, those show up in your content, or even as I talk to some of my colleagues, it shows up in your view of almost everybody in the company deals with content in some way. They're contributing to it, they're using it, they're creating it, they're looking for it, they can't find it, you name it. So it also, again, I think that is also a reason I am very fortunate. I work with mainly B2B marketers, but I work with any role, many Forrester's clients. They all have questions about content these days.
I just got to ask, like, when ChatGPT hit the world, what was the initial sort of response from and questions you got, that from folks, and how has that changed over the last couple of years? Like, how have people matured? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, for sure. That really rocked people, and a lot at the time. A lot of people encouraged employees. It was more experimenting individually, and on the surface, that's very reasonable. It was so new, but as a former content leader, I was looking at this as this is really interesting. You're removing this constraint about anybody can go create. So what do you think of the rest of, let's say, your workflows? Like, does your review or approval cycle get better? Are you thinking about how, some people worried about, does this overload our design team? Or do we have any easier steps for brand governance? Or are we aligning better with other teams about what we're creating rather than, let's say, duplicating or even creating conflicting information going out to market?
That is definitely ahead of the curve. I just remember, going back as a marketer, and everyone could see that this was a seismic shift and was going to change everything. And we were just getting hands-on, experimenting. But you're right. Like,
Yeah.
it's great to have someone like you thinking about, well, what does this mean at scale? How do you, adhere to brand and compliance and guidelines and guardrails? I think that's a interesting part of what the talking to your analyst can help you do, as you're navigating something different. And I've heard you say very specifically, generative AI amplifies what already exists for better or worse. Maybe that's getting back to like the idea of, your org, you ship what your org is like. But walk me through like the moment that conviction hardened for you, and what was that like?
Yeah, so some of this came through with the client conversations and that followed that. I remember talking to a comms leader and communications leader who said in her team, she had a lot of people who were divided about the use of AI. And she wanted to inspire everybody. So she encouraged them to all expense their own generative AI tool of choice. And I realized then we're going to start to see some unevenness in how teams work together. There's the possibility of some people who will decide, I'm just going to wait till things settle down before I learn this. It's so new. There are other people that they may go off and use their tools of choice, but you're really seeing that scattering into working as individuals. That to me signified this is just as scattered as the content world could be.
Yeah, and it created even more fragmentation and scattering.
Yeah.
Another thing that I see come out in your research often is this idea of credibility. You talk about the three things that consistently show up in organizations that do build credibility: topical authority, expert-driven content, and independent validation. So can you talk a little bit about those three ideas and why it's important to why those are the ones that successful organizations present to drive their credibility?
Yeah, and those aren't new ideas. I know sometimes talking with clients, I can see the look on people's faces. And so they are perennial challenges. And I see that because it requires prioritization. You're making a commitment on each of those. You're able to live with some trade-offs of not doing other things. All of those things you mentioned, whether it's like topical authority, that's selecting topics that your audience cares about, and then you're sorting out what your company wants to be known for and what do you have to say on this topic. You really need to know your audience well, and so some of that pulls people out of that self-centered, shipping the org chart kind of thought. The other thing would be like your expert driven content of, if you're working with your expert, it relies on some relationships, and a lot of that, we are so speedy in thinking about what marketing is going to do next. There are different perceptions across different teams, and so I would say many times you're relying on people who are out there, they're with your customers or running the business. Their perception is they may not understand what's going to be done with their contribution. They start to feel like maybe they're, in fact, some of these review processes, it's very subjective. And so you also look at the fact of people wanting the validation. It really matters what third parties say about you, and you roll back for all time. Marketers have always been working with the media or industry analysts, and more recent years, review sites, and that takes longer term effort. So again, it's prioritizing that rather than getting caught up in the short term thinking or the reactiveness.
Yeah, and I want to hone in a little bit on the topical authority concept, because I think one of the things I see I see often, and I'm curious if you do, is companies are operate in a market and they need to present as an authority in the market that they operate in, right? But how do good companies pick what slice of the market to create? Like, first of all, how do you create authority in a market that's crowded, right?
Yeah.
And I think the key is finding the niche, right? And finding the slice that, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm curious and just thinking out loud. But if, how do you go about creating authority in a crowded market, and what are some of the things companies have done to create
Yeah.
their authority?
Oh, you bring up a good point. The crowded market, I know this, people say it is easy to see people who are just copying what others are doing. And part of this is you want to be a listener, you want to observe what's going on and see where there's shared and growing interest. You also really need to know your audience well. And it's making some decisions about who you are for and knowing members of the buying group, and even looking at your existing customers, that if you're going out on a certain topic, is it believable that when you talk about being an authority, do you have the rights? Do you have the expertise, the experience? If you look at all of your track record, is this really going to stand up? If you look at your existing customers as a slice of that, or like you say, if you're starting to think about who else you're going to go after, you really need to be masterful and talking with, if it's really cross functional, you're talking with all the parts of the business about it is feasible. We not only support this in what we do with our offerings, we have something original to say. And so a lot of that goes back to you are working with different experts. I think marketers, you could have some of the smartest marketers, but you do need to work with your customer facing teams. Obviously, anybody involved with your product, your services, they would really bring out what are some of the sharpest things that you're going to be doing. And so it should line up really well. If you're doing this right, it lines up with where your company is going. And it's not, I feel for some marketers, you're too far out from that, or you've strayed from some things that either your audience cares about or what's realistic for your company to be believed.
Very much agreed. And what I try to think about, what is it that we have a right to be a authoritative voice in, more so than everyone else, right? Yeah, like if at the top of the funnel of ideas, we, just even writer in general, like we could talk a lot about AI, right? But what makes us, in general AI topics, we have to be careful about what we decide to write about, because there's a lot of companies that could say have a similar authority. But when we start to narrow down on our ICP or the use cases that we're great great at or the unique problems we've helped our customers solve. Now we get into a much more authoritative stance that we really do have the right, more so than anyone else, to talk about these things. That's the way I look at it. And I think that's how I would encourage others to look at it. Is that fair?
I like that. And I would say yes, and I'd even build that you're right when you find that too, the fact that it's something durable. You're not switching up every quarter. And so you're right, when you have that good fit, it keeps compounding.
Yeah. And I think we've all had that, feeling of shipping something that isn't really differentiated. Like everyone's done it in their career. So we just admit
Yeah.
it, right? Shipping something because you need to be out there and have air cover, on the topic, but it doesn't feel great because it's stuff that anyone else can say, and you're filling a gap, but you're not really, like, you put all this effort in, it's not really differentiating. So the more so we can, nail that, the better.
Very true. We always justified it too. We would write to keywords or we would justify this short term effort would help us with something. So you're right.
Another subject I've heard you talk about is a zero click world. Can you explain that concept?
Yeah. So really what we are now seeing, and our Forrester data backs this up, but you can't have missed this as a marketer, is that our buyers are using AI at every stage of the buying process. And in going into answer engines or AI powered search, they're able to get answers they don't need to click through. And so the zero click comes in. They are much more informed just from some cursory conversations that they're having. They are able to get at more of this information. And we see this of their queries may be longer than previous search patterns, but they are able to come away with some answers rather than having to click through and go to multiple places.
Yeah, I think we're seeing it in the metrics. One of the things that has been uniquely challenging in kind of a funny way from the marketers and the leaders I've talked to is we finally got to a place where we thought we could measure well what drives traffic, right? Like it felt like, hey, we can, we're really getting able to instrument our traffic. And the adage of, I know 50% of my marketing works, but I don't know which 50%, like that actually started to feel like a relic of an old time, right? And then along comes the chat engines, and we're back at, hey, my direct traffic is going up, and I don't know where it's coming from because there's no click. They're just coming to our site after, and they've heard about us through a chat interaction. And maybe we'll figure this out eventually, but for now, it is a zero click world. What is the implication for marketers?
Yeah. So one of the things Forrester calls it the visibility vacuum, and that really is one of my colleagues had coined this phrase. As you said, we felt like we had this playbook and we could attribute everything, and so now it really turns into sharpening your other senses. And that's, I would say, the other thing of marketers realizing now you've got other executives asking you about this because AI is becoming more of the interpreter of your brand. So as buyers ask their questions, AI is synthesizing some of these answers. Where I see us taking action is we're realizing this potentially affects whether it's shortlist inclusion or perceptions of a category or competitive comparisons. Those are some really big stakes where people are now paying attention to how much of our, let's say, of our effort, whether it's owned content or all of marketing, if you're going after earned coverage, you're going after customer reviews, that validation of what others say about you. It's getting a lot of these piece parts of marketing working together, that you're putting all of that together now rather than continuing like we previously, as you were saying, you could look at rankings or you could look at traffic or some of these discrete pieces. Now you are really putting this together to see how does this change the way that we're showing up in AI.
More than ever, you need good fundamentals and perhaps a framework. And so you've written about the content decision framework, which I think gives us some of those principles. Can you walk through the framework and what it is?
Yeah. So I talk with a lot of marketers. And of course, these past few years, having gone through so much of this change, whether it's adopting AI, this AI visibility challenge we were just talking about, people know they have a lot of AI capabilities, whether they have corporate provided horizontal tools, but marketers know they've got specific needs. It comes up because everybody creates content, of course, and your MarTech stack just got a lot more capabilities. But it is really also born of people ask, I don't really have a single tool that does everything. And so you got to stop. This framework really was where I was trying to walk through how would you go about looking at this, and in particular with content, because you have so many people involved. If you're first starting to look at, get really task or use case specific, are you looking at certain content modalities or formats? For some people, that does make a difference. For example, you would say in video or audio versus other kinds of content. But you'd also look at what we call a use case, the task or the stage of the in the content life cycle that you're going to address this. Then you're looking at who is using this tool. If you're looking at specific user skill levels, or you are really looking at the needs, let's say, of all of marketing or all of the functions, that would bring in some different considerations. And I know we've talked previously about, I really see different types of creators in an organization. If you've got content and creative professionals, you do have some specialization. If you are trying to equip every domain expert, every employee in the company, you would expect potentially some different things.
Let's talk about the transformation that AI brings to these teams. When you look at, you know, marketing teams that are thriving right now, that are, you know, not just surviving, but like genuinely energized and using AI to do better work, you know, what do they have in common? What is the commonality? What do those teams look like, or what are they doing? What is the nature of those teams that seem to be doing well?
So it's interesting. I looked at this both a data perspective. I did a series of interviews, and I can say these teams really place a premium. First, they're very curious. You would guess that this has presented some new challenges for them. They're open to the learning, and it is part of the team culture. It's not just experimenting for the sake of it. There's some discipline to it, though, and I would say that's really a team that's not chasing every new tool. They're understanding how the work is changing, and they had a good handle on some of that operations before. You can look at multiple marketers of this, markers in content, let's say, or in different use cases, different aspects of marketing. I'd also say they're open to redesigning some of the workflows and redefining some of the roles. They really are normalizing learning in public and getting more of their team into try this. But as I said, it's not just experimenting for the sake of it. They really are rethinking and keeping a handle on, how did this make a difference for us? If you're looking at some of your business outcomes, this was not just an edict to use AI for the sake of it. It was, how are we improving on our metrics as marketers or as a business?
Yeah, I think my experience has been very similar. You tend to see, you know, a lot of teams just like, you know, trying to figure it out, but they're doing the day job, and they're, you know, kind of like figuring out how to operate and bring this new thing into the way they do things already. But the teams that I see thriving are the ones that are just kind of opening the possibilities up and diving in, and, you know, have certain people in specific roles to try to drive transformation, and you get those like really passionate, energetic people and celebrate and promote what they're doing. I do see a difference between some of the attitudes of, and it has nothing to do with, you know, you would think maybe it's company size or, you know, scale, or, you know, I've seen, you know, legacy stodgy financial services companies have like the most progressive approach versus some like tech companies that seem to be operating in the 2010s, right? What makes it different? The difference happened there. Is it the leadership? Is it the people, or is it a combination of the both?
Oh, I think that's fascinating. There's a combination of that you were talking about, of some of that having that goodness of some constraints when you talk about some of those regulated industries or a stodgy industry that's not going to tolerate all kinds of experimentation. I think that is great to give people, here's a range, work within this element. That gets people going. And I think you're right. Of there's no, I'd say, no skipping or working around it. So I think in some of those teams, they know some aspects of this, they're required. And if, especially looking at AI, there's some aspects of work that people are happy to get taken off their hands. They're happy to have some way to speed up work so they can do other things. So they get onto that kind of thinking.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. One of the more surprising enthusiasts of AI that I've come across are the compliance folks. You know, they have a reputation of being the people who say no, right, and being the people who slow things down. So if you're not familiar with large financial institutions, they have big compliance teams that, will review work. And it usually takes a while to get work through. Like, you'd be amazed how long it takes to get a blog post live in a big bank, right? But they're embracing AI because they're able to encode the guardrails into the platform and have to review less. And when I go out and talk to them and show them, okay, well, you can encode your rules and you can run a piece of content through it, and it'll give you they love it because their backlog is 3 weeks old. And now they're able to just hone in on the things that are present, that are being flagged, and move much faster. So it's amazing to see the different types of, enthusiasm for it.
It totally changes some of those roles. That gives people a breath of fresh air. You don't have to keep doing this, like you said, in the backlogs and the weeks and weeks of work.
All right, so let's talk about, you're working with teams that are changing their operating model. There's a couple things that I think come up often that I would love to get your take on. First off, how do you advise them to evaluate new tools and look at the stuff that's out there that they could potentially buy?
Yeah, so this goes back to I think of it as what is your problem? What are you trying to solve? Versus I know that all went through a period a couple of years ago of explosion of technology or new features that come up. It's really getting clear about what you are going to be, what you're trying to improve or what you're trying to maybe you're doing something that wasn't possible before. And so then you really are looking at how do your people work today? If you have some understanding of this today, even acknowledging you want to change, that understanding really helps you because then you're trying to look at of these choices, do I have something that helps us use our organization's context or standards, or just like you were explaining, how do we start to encode some things? It's not going to mean working from scratch every time. This is going to help us with the lift of some of the work that we do. And that comes back to you want something that can help you. Is it governed? Is it measured? Is there some accountability? It's not setting everybody up to work individually.
And how do you advise on scaling safely? One of the biggest concerns that I see are, hey, we're going to give AI to, hundreds of people to build content, and we're going to scale this content operation, and we're going to build so much stuff, but there's concern about how do we do it safely? How do you advise on that?
Yeah, that sounds really good in principle, and you can get there. But I find a lot of teams who move and do this well, they're not trying to scale everywhere all at once. So it's acknowledging that you might have some phases or you might start in certain parts of teams. You also would have, there's some pre work where you're really refining a lot of your guidelines. You're defining, if you have a current review process, where also do you want some human oversight to remain in place? So you're getting clear about those things. You'd also look at the types of content. You're acknowledging that not every type of content is equal, or identify some of the content where there's some risk. And that's what I mean of it really is risky, meaning is there some real consequence that happens? Is there really some specific expertise that's required or skill set to work on certain kinds of content versus others? And also putting some controls around that. And it's meant to help people. It's not meant to, I think people fear locking this down. I think of it more as make this easy. To your point about compliance or certain roles, they realize you can encode some things. There's a lot of repeatability that's exciting in lifting some of those parts of the work versus then you may have some of your content creative professionals. You want them to be able to use these tools and build out great concepts, do more of the strategic work that's possible.
I've heard you describe it as scaling marketing with quality, trust, and control. Why those three terms, and what does it mean to drive quality, to drive trust and control?
Yeah, I see that as eventually it's scaling expertise or what's meaningful about your brand. And so that quality, back to are you saying something that's worth it to your audience? They want to hear it. Is it trust, meaning is this something that buyers believe? Is it something that even in an AI world, you really have all of these signals of authority to back that up? And really that the control of, are you able to maintain these standards? Are you able to maintain some consistency? Those three things I see in the content world, that is very much what marketers care about.
I want to ask you about a potential landmine or challenge that I see often. with those who have been working with AI now for 4 years, so to speak. They are very eager and enthusiastic to use AI in marketing, and they are investigating, experimenting, doing all the things we talked about, learning how to use it well. And then along comes IT, and IT says, we bought a bunch of licenses for Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT, and this is what you have to use. Can we just talk about that situation? Is that that's what I see? Do you see the same thing, first of all?
Absolutely. That is now, I think, corporate life catching up, where marketers, as you said a few years ago, whether people used individual tools, personal tools, or some marketers move forward more quickly than their company. So you're right. Of companies now are issuing, like you said, I'll call it horizontal tools because they're very accessible. Corporate is giving them to everyone. This perception that it's useful. I think of it for marketers of where does some of our work break down? Because you and I both know there are some requirements that marketing has. And so at some point, you're starting to realize it's not about generating more. You can give every employee, every function, more power to be productive, meaning you can do things you couldn't before, you can do more of it volume wise. But now you've introduced some issues with quality and governance and the approval processes, or even I see it as reuse. And how do we take what we have? Can we improve upon it and refine it? And so now I'm questioning, are we doing things in terms of content? Is this going to perform the way that we intended?
Yeah. I see three challenges in this, and I just love curious if you agree on these three. First, you said governance. So I think we're fully agreed. Governance is really hard with those tools. You would think it's not, but it is.
Yeah.
They're built for content making stuff, and they're built for coding, really. Like those are the use cases that are great, but they're not great for governance at scale. I also find that the challenge that we see is they're not great for team-wide work, like things that need to be across multiplayer, right? That's not just a single user productivity use case. The tools are great, but obviously Claude, Copilot, like these are powerful tools, but often to get the most out of them, you need to be more of a technical user than a business user. So that's what I see. Is that ring true? And did I miss anything?
You spelled it out very, very well, because I would just add on to that. You're absolutely right. When I talk to some marketers, that multiplayer aspect gets lost. Even when I've heard somebody say, "Oh, but I have a team member who set up an agent for brand voice,"
Right.
we know that is just one part of this in terms of how teams collaborate. And the other, I'll just say, I was kind of smiling when a marketer acknowledged, like you said, the greatness when you have some of your most passionate people who want to get in and build things, they can. But this marketer said, well, the CIO and CFO finally realized this is getting very expensive. Do you need to give every marketer the keys to the Ferrari? Was how she put it.
Right. Or do they need to be generating, like, do they need to be writing the prompts? Do they need to be writing, like we call them playbooks in Writer? Do they all need to be generating the playbooks, or can they use the playbook and, get the runtime AI as opposed to the build time AI, which is a big difference. Yeah, that collaboration thing I think is a big unsolved
Yeah.
situation in marketing, because marketing is not a series of individuals doing a bunch of different things and then just putting it out there. You're unifying around your brand, your story, your narrative, and your campaigns. And those are multiplayer. And it's really important that the marketing team is operating in synchronicity across your AI tools. And so I know this is a writer sponsored podcast, and I try to stay away from it, but that's one of the things that I see that people love about using Writer is that we've baked that in. And I think that's so important for marketers to be successful.
That rings true. It's pulling people out of their individual use, or the very thing about you don't need everyone starting from scratch. Even if you have a teammate who is passing on, let's say, prompts or things in the other tools, you want people right there in the tool, able to collaborate and comment and move forward and know why did we do this, not that.
Another idea that I've heard you talk about that I'm really excited for us to chat about is this idea of continuous adaptation. What excites me about it is that we don't want to incrementally improve marketing using AI. What are the ways that marketing can be rethought with AI at the center that you couldn't do before AI. And I think this idea of continuous adaptation is one of them. So could you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, so for a lot of marketing's history, we're used to operating in campaigns where you plan it, you build a lot of things, you execute or launch it, you measure it, move on. And so I think today with the buyer behavior, with AI systems, that long range of how you are found to how people form and continue their perceptions and preference, with the way that competitive dynamics are going to be changing constantly, it's really going to push you to be able to, as a marketer, how do you continuously improve, adapt? How are you adjusting so that you keep balancing your, yes, you're constantly producing, but you're learning. You're improving from some of these things. You can't keep recreating from scratch, but also if you're spending time chasing the signals, there used to be such lag time for teams in deciding what would we do next.
Yeah, it's that lag time, right? So I think we're used to this waterfall way of doing marketing. It's like I build a campaign, I put it out there, I wait a little while, I get some feedback and signal. 3 weeks, 6 weeks later, I launch another campaign with my learnings.
Yes.
I am seeing a world, and I'm starting to see folks really dip their toe in this. So I think we're still a little bit ahead of the curve here, but I'm excited by the progress I'm seeing. Where you can have we're seeing is agents that are looking for signals. What's happening with competitors? What's happening in the market? What kind of data are you getting in your product usage, right? And literally from the campaigns themselves, what are we seeing in terms of performance of the campaign, right? So like that's the first side. Any other signals that you are seeing?
Those are important ones because I think of it as, whether, like you said, competitor, your own existing content performance. I think everybody's chasing the AI visibility signals. And I love that you mentioned the product usage, that even buyer insights. If you're seeing a lot of those things, that combination can really help you improve.
Right. So there's three parts though, right? So like you have the input, the signals, then you need to do something about it.
Yes.
How do you propose you take the signals and make a change on the fly?
All right, so this is ahead of the curve for some teams because I see this as it's going to pull us out of working so subjectively. I agree with you. Of if this brings people into a regular cadence, again, pulling up it to be more multiplayer. That as individuals, we used to have that lag time or waterfall in some of our activities, even as a marketing team. If there's some kind of cadence, that yes, the idea would be, do you have some visibility to these? I'll call them signals that as a team, and I would even look at good teamwork would be you have somebody who will help you tell people what it means. Don't leave everybody to interpret the dashboard solo and assume that everybody walks away with the same interpretation about what are we going to create, what are we going to improve, what do we stop doing. Some of that would require we're going to have some of discussion about that or collaborate in a common space. And that way, if people are deciding, okay, now we're closing that lag time, are we realizing it's time to refresh this? It's time to update or move forward with more of this. Stop on that. That it affects then not only a deliverable, but think of marketers' calendars or the way that we devote some time, the way that we've booked out, let's say team meetings or things going on. You could shift how we use our time better. That's exciting.
That's right. I think this is where actually the biggest challenge is then deploying continuously, right? Because you're signaling, you're perceiving, you're deciding, and then you need to act. And I see right now the bottleneck is some of the legacy platforms we have were not designed, they were designed around the waterfall process, not designed about a continuous adaptation. And so we have to figure out how do we, like we are personally, we've re-architected our site so that we can be more adaptive and we can launch things faster than the old way that we were doing it. And I think companies are going to need to think about the architecture and their tech stack, and is it conducive to the dynamism of something like this?
Yeah, it'll bring up a lot of questions. You're right of how much some teams will change. If this could be a phased approach for some teams.
So Lisa, let's talk about the results. So can you walk me through some of the research you've done on how AI is delivering measurable ROI in content? Curious what you're finding so far.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Marketers always ask, what are some of the highest priority areas we could go after? And again, they're very human. People want to know, how have other people solved this? What should I be looking for? And so I would break this into several areas. It's backed up by our data, our survey data, but also interviews and hearing most common areas, of course. Number one, you want to scale or improve some of the content you have. People call it optimizing. And this goes hand in hand with how are you making your content more appealing, using those insights and signals to appeal to human buyers and AI. The second area is how do you scale and repurpose? People look at that and it is saying, we have these existing assets, but I need this in different formats, or I need this for slight adaptation, different audiences, different geography. The third area is how are you prioritizing and really becoming more precise with your planning? That's perfect setup with the signals we were talking about of what are we doing and refining. We saw a lot of interest in this area, or what we learn about our audience. The fourth area would then be, of course, how are you governing a lot of your content? How are you building in a lot of these, I'll call it guardrails, controls? Can you build in some context for people that I see this as, again, it's protection of quality, that you are showing up not in a generic sense. All of these things about decisions, and even the example you gave about compliance. Is there some approved terminology? This is not, you're creating something and there's a much bigger bottleneck than waiting for editors or approvers or your creative team. This is where you can bring a lot of things right into the workflow and catch that at an early stage.
Awesome. Okay, very helpful. Now, some rapid fire questions. First thing that comes to mind, what is one marketing skill that you think becomes more valuable because of AI, not less?
I think your judgment, your expertise. We know that AI can help anybody create, but you, the human, should decide what exists in the first place. And you should decide what's valuable.
Wholeheartedly agree. What is the most common mistake teams make when they're trying to automate content?
They want to automate, but maybe they don't understand the full process. And what I mean by that is sometimes people jump into this and they have not fully understood how that work happens today. They're making assumptions and they're skipping some dependencies, or they're really thinking about the problem more than what would you ideally want to fix your future on.
Right. And then you get output that's not great because it came from a place of poor setup.
Yeah.
Okay. What's a piece of advice that you used to give that I used to swear by that AI has changed your mind on?
I used to spend a lot of time thinking about the perfect prompt, and I found a lot of marketers who, for a while, they were asking for prompting templates or examples. And today, I'm a lot more focused on the context than the prompt. This goes hand in hand with judgment, as I'm thinking about you don't have to be especially clever. You need to know the context about whether that's your brand standard, the audience insights, what you're trying to do, all the things. If you feel you are a content strategist at heart, some of that should come through. If you're a subject matter expert, you have that to offer more so than a perfect prompt.
I totally agree with that in the sense that, the latest version of even our technology, we're often rewriting the prompt. The AI is rewriting the prompt as after your prompt because it's smart enough. It can reason through how to better ask that question, and so prompting skills have become less. Not they're still valuable, but less of the front and center. And as you were saying, the context you put around the prompt is even more important. That's great. Um, how do we stay human while growing businesses in the age of AI?
Ooh, this is a good one in terms of remembering your audience, remembering that everybody has some struggle. If you're thinking about this in terms of what does your buyer want from your company, that really gets us out of just thinking, like you said, all these thoughts on automation. How do we change the way we work? But try to remember some of the reasons, whether it is focus on your buyer customer or focus on some of the reasons you got into your role, what you really love to do.
Yeah, what are they trying to accomplish? You have people at the end of this funnel that are engaging with you for a reason, and we can't lose sight of that. They're not just there to receive content; they're there to try to solve a problem. I really like that takeaway. Okay, last question. If there's one thing that you want the CMOs that are listening to this conversation to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Keep up your relationships with your CIO and CFO, because you really have to maintain this relationship and explain why marketing has specific requirements, why there's great potential for marketers to help lead and be part of your company's transformation.
Spoken from someone who sees the situation from a 50,000-foot view. So very much appreciate that, Lisa. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being part of this today. Thank you. Thanks again. Wonderful, wonderful chat.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. So Lisa, I would say, knows her stuff. What would you say? Diego.
Yeah, I think she's a world-class expert. I think she knows her stuff inside out. As a practitioner and as an analyst, she's great at what she does.
So what stuck with you from that conversation?
A lot. We've talked about this idea of continuous adaptation internally with our customers, and the first time I heard her talk about that, my ears just lit up, and my eyes lit up, and my ears perked up. And I think she's nailed it. Like, I do think that this is where it's going. Personally, I'm super excited about this because like this could be a potentially leap forward of how marketing is done, not just an improvement of the way it's done already. And so talking to her about that and seeing an analyst, like ahead of the curve, she's like ahead of the curve on this. This is not a lagging thing that an analyst has like said, oh, people are doing this. She's ahead of the curve because this is just really starting to become a topic. So that really stuck out to me as like a main thing from the conversation.
Can I just point out, I do think it is significant that her background is in content, because the way that she has viewed the marketing org as a practitioner and understanding like content is a fuel that runs an engine,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
And
Yeah.
so her being able to say, yeah, continuous adaptation is where things are going. We are continuous adaptation machines as content marketers. We are constantly reading the signals, every assignment, every bit of feedback we get. We are adapting our approach in a way that's very similar to how LLMs might be doing
Yes.
this,
Yes,
right?
that's fair.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a significant connection there between her point of view as a former practitioner and now her point of view as an analyst.
Well, also, and I love that it signals that content is not static. Content shall be dynamic. And that's been hard to do. Just knowing the lead times that campaigns need to produce stuff. And, I also think, and you correct me if I'm wrong because you're more the practitioner than I am. But if you need to write about something, you need to know the topic. You need the data, you need the information, you need what the thing is. And
Yeah.
so that has also been a very, I think, like that process can be slow. So anything we can do to speed up your learning and your understanding of a topic, it makes you more dynamic.
Yeah, it's synthesizing that information in a way that you can absorb it. But she put out something so true about topical authority, for example, right? Content marketers are very used to writing up, you know, BSing their way through an assignment sometimes because it's checking a mark, it's checking a box in
Right.
what needs to be out there.
Yeah. Right.
And we can feel the difference between when we know something inside and out, and so does the audience, right?
That's exactly what I was saying. Who hasn't put something out and you're just like, all right, let's just ship this thing. It needs to be, we need the coverage here, but it's like, I hate to say it, but like, you feel like, okay, it's mediocre, but we need it. Right. And like, so that doesn't feel good. So really it's important to derive topical authority in what you write about.
And AI amplifies that even more, that lack of authority, because if the person who's working with the AI doesn't have that authority to begin with, they don't know what's going to be the hallucinated
Yeah.
stuff. They don't
Right.
know.
Right. I think she brought up a couple other really interesting things that are worth calling out: the team aspect and the collaboration aspect. And, we talked about this idea of, a solo person versus multiplayer and how
Mhm.
marketing is a multiplayer game, and, the struggle of AI teams. I thought that was teams using AI to rebuild how they work. I thought that was interesting. I also really loved the conversation around compliance and governance and how important that is, how helpful AI can be for that, and the teams, embracing it.
Let me put it this way. Since we've implemented some of the embedded brand guardrails in our own systems, the back and forth between myself as a cleanup artist sometimes and some of our folks that aren't copywriters, we're a leaner team because we're still building up. It's day and night. You can see when the guardrails are in place and the messaging is unified across all of these things and the time that it saves somebody like me
Yep.
having to make those calls.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine what it's like for a global team that has a compliance team waiting downstream.
I think she sees it at the scale of, she works with the large enterprises, and she sees that every day. And it's just not something to be ignored when you're thinking about AI at scale. the compliance and the guardrails and everything around, both the brand and regulatory impacts are front and center in a way that is not glamorous but is important. So I thought that was interesting. And then the last thing that she left us with, I thought was also interesting. You know, we didn't talk a lot about it. We talked a little bit about it, but the CIO CFO relationship,
Yeah.
it's just so important. And I do think a lot of marketers are struggling right now with IT driven solutions and need to get better at, as she said, showing what marketing needs to be successful as opposed to just working around what's given to them.
Well, let me put this question to you, Diego. Based on your experience, because you said you've seen these things go sideways when they have, they're starting to build a production use case here. And then CIO comes in and says, actually, we're going to use this bundled platform, for example. When do you think that conversation needs to happen between the CMO and the CIO before things go sideways?
The obvious answer is super early, and you need to build that relationship between the functions so that the conversation is not, you're not engaging just over a conflict. That's number one. Number two, I think something the CMO needs to do better is start pushing the growth lever, AI for growth and revenue as opposed for efficiency, because it's just harder when it's all about cost cutting and efficiency to make a case for something other than what we've already bought. If you're focused on efficiency and productivity, and then you want to bring something else in, spend more money when money has already been spent, it's just a really hard case to make. The answer is going to be like, well, okay, maybe you get more ROI from this other tool, more productivity back from this other tool, but you're asking us to go spend XYZ amounts of dollars in addition to what we've already spent. When you're talking about top line, that's a different story. And that's often where the CIO hasn't put the business case together yet, but GTM should be. So that's how I would handle the situation: is think about the use cases, build the relationships, have good working situation there, but also think about the use cases for growth as opposed to cost cutting. Those are more conducive to, hey, I want to make this other investment because we're going to get this thing that we couldn't do with the other thing.
Do CMOs have to raise their hand to say, hey, I want in on this collaboration? Or are CIOs coming to CMOs? I mean, who's initiating that collaboration to begin with?
It's bidirectional. It's such a nuanced answer depending on the organization. If I'm thinking about a multinational, conglomerate, it's probably somewhat political and relationship based, or it might not be. It's so nuanced from
Right.
environment to environment. You just have to relationship building is part of the job, and so you have to do that as a CMO.
Well, that's something worth exploring, actually, a little bit more, I think, maybe in future content, is cultivating those relationships. How do you cultivate those relationships in a way?
You know what? I'll put it on record. Let's get a CIO in here and talk about
Yes.
what does the CMO need to know, or like the CIO's perspective on this, right? And that would be a fun conversation to have.
We'll get on it. Awesome. Well, thank you again for leading such a great conversation with Lisa. And we'll see you guys next time.
Lots of fun. Thank you all.